Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is part 2 of the lecture explaining interfaces. In the last lecture, we were discussing about the similarities between the class and the interface. Now we will discuss the differences between the interface and the class. One of the basic differences is that you cannot instantiate an interface. As far as the classes are concerned, once you have declared a class, you can instantiate it. But as far as the interfaces are concerned, you can never instantiate interface. Why is it so? The reason being, whenever the classes are defined, basically the classes represents the entities, and you already know the entities hold the data members, and they also have their member functions as well. So the data members usually represents the data for the entities, where the interfaces, they do not hold any of the data. So the function and the functionality defined in general, or in an abstract way. So they do not have a specialized functionality. So that's the reason that the interfaces cannot be instantiated, because they will not be holding any of the data. So there is no use for the objects as well. They are only implemented, and as far as once you implement them, then that means you will have to redefine their functionalities. Okay. Next, the interface does not contain any constructors. So as already explained, once you have no data members in the case of the interfaces, so there's no need for the constructor as well. As you already know, the constructor is used in the classes only, and the sole purpose of the constructor is to initialize the data members. Because in the interfaces we do not have any of the data members, so there is no need for the constructor as well. And also the Java does not permit you to define the constructor as for the interfaces. You define it, you will get the syntax error. All of the methods in an interface are the abstract. That is important, that whatever the method you will define in the interface, it must be abstract method. The abstract method you already know. In the last lecture we have already discussed it, that the abstract method usually do not have any specific functionality. You define it as the abstract, and if you want to reuse it, you will have to redefine its functionality. An interface cannot contain the instance field, right? The instance fields or the data members. The only fields that can appear in the interface must be declared both the static and the final. What is that field? That is the function. So it must be static and the final. So in the last lecture, I have already explained about the static and the final thing, and they are defined by default. Interface is not extended by the class. It is important. The extend and the implement, these are the two words. You will have to draw the difference between the extend and the implement. Extends is basically a keyword, and the implements, that is another keyword. Extends are used for the classes. Whenever you want to inherit a class, then you will have to use extend keyword. And whenever you want to inherit a interface, then you will have to use an implement keyword. Okay, make sure. So whenever you want to derive the functionalities of a class, then you will have to extend that class. That means the parent class will be extended. And once you want to use the functionalities of an interface, it should be implemented. Interface can implement the multiple interface. That is very important. As far as the Java is concerned, in my last lecture I have already explained you the Java does not permit you multiple inheritance, right? You can only extend one class at a time. But what if I have a situation that I want to use a functionality of a keyboard and the mouse at the same time? So if I have a class for the keyboard and I have a class for the mouse as well, then due to the limitation of the Java, I can only extend one class at a time, right? So what's another way through which I can use both the keyboard and the mouse functionalities? So the best way is to define the functionalities of the keyboard in one interface and define the functionalities of the mouse in another interface, and at the same time you can uh, use both of these interfaces within one class. So that means you can use multiple interfaces with one class, right? And but there is a limitation that if there is a class, then you can only extend the one class at a time only in the Java. But if there are more than one interface and the functionality is defined within the interfaces, so you can use the multiple interfaces at the same time. So that is the alternative to that limitation of the Java. I hope you got the point. Okay, interface. No, we will discuss the syntax of the interfaces, how we can use them. The interface keyword is used to declare an interface. Interface basically is a keyword. If you want to declare an interface, you will have to use this keyword. Here's a simple example to declare an interface. As you can see, first you will have to define the access specifier, that is the public, private, whatever. If you will define the private, it will have its own limitation, but usually the interfaces are publicly defined. So once you have defined the access specifier, then you use a keyword interface with it, and then give the name of the interface as per your choice. Then it will have the body part, and you will define the functions, the functions prototype only. Those functions will not have its own body. So that is the basic generally the syntax to define an interface. If you want to define your own interface, then access modifier, public, interface keyword, and the name of, for example, keyboard. And then you will define the key press, key release, and something like this, the functions. And you will only define the prototypes or the abstract methods. Okay, understanding the relationship between the classes and interfaces. I have already explained it. No, we'll discuss it visually. As shown in the figure, you can see the class extends another class. So usually if there is a class and you want to inherit or you want to use the functionalities of that class, so it will be extended in that case. So class will extend another class, but if there is an interface and you want to use the functionality of the interface to, within a class, then you will have to implement it. So implements is the keyword, extends is another keyword. Extends are used for the classes. To inherit the classes, you use extends keyword. To inherit interface, you use implements, right? Interface can also extend another interface. That is very new thing. Interface, for example, you have two different interfaces. You have defined your own interface and you want to use the existing functionalities of another interface, then you can extend both of them, right? So interfaces are basically extended. Interface to interface, they're extended. Interface to a class, it is implemented, and class to class, it is extended, right? So you will have to draw this difference. Let's discuss them with the help of few examples. As you can see, there is one interface, printable, right? This is the interface. Why is it interface? Because it has the interface keyword with it. So it is defined publicly, and as you can see, I have defined a print as a abstract method. It do not have any functionality, right? So how can I use this interface within a class? For that, I will have to declare another class, public class, this application 4. It implements printable. As you can see, this is the interface. I am actually using it right here. So I will have to use the implements keyword with that interface. And then, as you can see, it has a default or the abstract method, that is print. No, it is compulsory. If I have implemented this interface, uh, all of the functions defined or the declared in that interface must be redefined here, right? You cannot leave them any of the method here. For example, it has a print1 and print2 through functions defined in the printable interface. Then if I implement this interface in that class, so it is compulsory that I will have to redefine the print1 and print2 right here as well. At least it should have its body, regardless it is empty. If it is empty, it will be acceptable, because the Java compiler will have to see these two brackets, the opening scope and the closing scope of that represents the body, that this function has been declared, right? or it has been actually defined. No, I have another class, public class interface example, and in that class I have a main. As you can see, I have declared this object, and through object I'm calling a print function, and it will be executed, right? So in that case, it will have a specific, there can be question that what is the purpose then? Why I have defined it with the interface, and now I am using it right here? Because most of the cases, the answer is, most of the cases there are few built-in things that are actually not, you will not find them in the classes. For example, like the keyboard and the mouse. So if you explore the documentation of the Java, you will find the interfaces related to keyboard and the mouse, right? Those are actually built already to derive those keyboards and the mouse in your applications, so which will be defined in the interfaces. That is just an example to give you an overview or the understanding about the interfaces and their uses. Most of the time you do not define your own interfaces for your applications. You use the built-in interfaces which are already there, but there is a possibility you can define your own interfaces as well. So if there are interfaces which you can find them in the documentation about the keyboard and the mouse, you can derive them by yourself. So in that case, for example, as I have already explained about the example, the key press and key release. So if you want to draw, for example, if I key press, I should get this particular point and I drag it till I release the key of the mouse, right? So the mouse pressed and mouse released. So I need to get these 2 points, and then I need to draw a rectangle on those 2 points, right? The coordinates, I will get xy and xy for the final. So that is your functionality, you will have to define it. But to derive or to get to access the key press and the key release functions, it should have been declared somewhere so that you can get those events. So there are the events or there are the interfaces already provided to you by the Java about the keyboard and the mouse, so through which you can use them. Okay, let's extend this example with more details. For example, I have declared one interface with the bank, and the rate of interest is the common functionality for all of the banks. For example, there is a one specific Bank of Punjab can be, for example, there can be a bank of State Bank or the any other bank. So that functionality will be redefined by their own. The rate of interest, for example, it can be different for one specific bank, and it can be different for another bank, but the functionality is there, that is the rate of interest. So you can define your own functionalities. So those two classes, they just implemented a bank, but the function is common, but their functionalities are different, right? So in that case, whatever the bank will instantiate, it can use its own rate of interest, you can get them out, right? This is the basically the example. Okay, there are few or there's an overview of the interfaces, whatever we have discussed. An interface declares method but does not supply the definition for them, right? So whatever the methods are declared in the interfaces must be the abstract methods. They do not have their definition, they do not have their body. Next, all data fields are public, final, static, they're by default, and all methods are public, abstract in the interface, right? You can add these qualifiers if you like, but why to bother? You cannot instantiate an interface, right? Because there no data for it, you cannot instantiate that. Interface is like a very abstract class, none of its abstracts are defined. An interface may also contain the constants, final variables. You would write an interface if you want classes of the various types to all have a certain set of capabilities. Implementing an interface, for example, key listener and action listener. For example, you have more than one interfaces, and how you can use them. You extend a class, but you implement an interface. So implements is a keyword. A class can only extend one class, so that is the limitation. If a class want to extend another class, you can only extend one class at a time, but if there are more than one interfaces, you can use them, the multiple inheritance right here. Implements key listener and the action listener. These are two different interfaces. So just by specifying this separator, that is the comma, you can add multiple. If you want add more, just put a comma here, and you can add more interfaces. The implements keyword is actually represented once only, and you can write the multiple, all separated by a comma. Okay, now there are few important things that you need to remember. For example, I want to use few of the functions, because whenever I will implement, let me give you an example with here. If I have a key listener, for example, key listener has 4 different functions which are defined in here. Now if I implement it, it will be mandatory for me to redefine all those 4 functions here. At least I will have to write their names regardless it has its empty body. For example, in my application I want to for example use 2 functions out of the 4: key pressed and key released. These are 2 functions, for example, and the rest 2 functions, they are not actually required in my application. So it is mandatory, if I implement interface, so it will be actually required to redefine all 4 functions, regardless I want to use 2 functions out of the 4, but it is mandatory for me to write all those 4 functions, right? So the next the slide will give you few example or the alternative way through which, if I want to use only 2 functions out of the 4, so it there's also a possibility how we can do that. So for that, it is possible to define some but not all the method defined in the interface. How we can do that? For that, you will have to define this class as the abstract. As you can see, there's a keyword to it. Implements a key listener. Now in that case, for example, if you have declared it abstract, then you can define any number of the functions. So it is not mandatory for you. Since this class does not supply all the methods it has promised, it is an abstract class. You must label it such with the keyword abstract. So in that you have the liberty, you can use or you can define 1 function, 2 functions, or any number of the functions of belonging to this interface key listener. You can even extend an interface with another interface, right? For example, you have declared your own interface and you want to extend it with some functionalities of the existing that was provided by the Java. You can also do that. So what are the interface for? A class can only extend 1 class, but it can implement the multiple interfaces. This lets the class fill the multiple roles. You can write the method that work for more than 1 kind of the classes, right? And we have discussed it right here. Multiple inheritance, you can or 1 class can implement more than 1 interfaces. That's all for the interfaces. I hope you got the idea about the interfaces and you can use them in your own applications. Thank you very much.